What if the most powerful communist state in history was never meant to stay communist? What if the Soviet Union, the superpower that shaped wars, borders, and ideologies, collapsed not because communism failed, but because it refused to change when the opportunity was right in front of it? Here's the uncomfortable question few history books ask. Was the Soviet Union doomed from the start, or did it walk away from a path that could have made it richer, stronger, and longer lasting than the United States? Because buried deep inside Soviet history is a moment, not one, but several, where leaders debated abandoning strict communism in favor of markets, private ownership, and incentives. Moments where the USSR could have chosen a different economic system, and if it had, the Cold War might never have happened the way we know it. The global economy could look unrecognizable today, and the Soviet Union might still exist. But why didn't it happen? And what does that decision tell us about modern economies today? Let's rewind. To understand the what if, we first need to understand what was. In 1917, Russia was collapsing. The Romanov dynasty had fallen. The economy was shattered by war, famine, and inequality. Into this chaos stepped Vladimir Lenin, promising something radical: a society without exploitation, without billionaires, without poverty, where the state controlled production for the good of all. Communism wasn't just an ideology, it was a rescue plan. And at first, it worked. The Bolsheviks seized factories, land, banks, and railways. Private ownership was abolished. Central planners in Moscow decided what would be produced, where, and at what price. This system became known as a command economy. But here's the first twist most people don't know. Lenin himself quietly admitted it was failing. By 1921, the Soviet economy was collapsing again, not from war this time, but from mismanagement. Factories stopped producing. Farmers hid grain instead of selling it. Cities starved. So Lenin did something unthinkable for a communist revolutionary. He introduced the new economic policy, NEP. Under the NEP, small businesses were allowed. Farmers could sell surplus grain for profit. Markets returned temporarily. It wasn't capitalism, but it wasn't pure communism either. And it worked. Food production increased. Cities stabilized. Living standards rose. For a brief moment, the Soviet Union flirted with markets, but then Lenin died, and power fell into the hands of a man who believed compromise was weakness. Joseph Stalin saw the NEP as a betrayal. To him, capitalism wasn't a tool, it was an enemy. So in the late 1920s, Stalin dismantled the NEP and doubled down on full central planning. What followed was the most aggressive economic experiment in human history. 5-year plans, forced collectivization, state-owned everything. The goal was simple: transform a poor agricultural society into an industrial superpower fast. And shockingly, Stalin succeeded. At first, the Soviet Union industrialized at breathtaking speed. Steel production exploded, heavy industry expanded, military output skyrocketed. Within decades, the USSR defeated Nazi Germany, built nuclear weapons, and launched the first satellite into space. To the outside world, it looked like proof that capitalism was unnecessary, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Because central planning solved one problem, speed, but created another, far more dangerous one. Incentives disappeared. In a market economy, profit signals success. In the Soviet system, quotas did. Factories weren't rewarded for quality, only for quantity. Managers inflated numbers. Workers had no reason to innovate. A famous Soviet joke captured the reality: they pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. Still, the system limped forward. By the 1950s and 60s, under Nikita Khrushchev, the USSR began to realize something alarming. The West wasn't collapsing, it was thriving. The United States, Western Europe, and Japan were experiencing explosive growth, driven by consumer markets, entrepreneurship, and technological competition. Soviet planners tried to respond. They reformed agriculture. They invested in science. They even discussed limited market mechanisms. But every time the question arose, should we allow private ownership, profit, or competition? The answer was no, because capitalism wasn't just an economic system, it was an ideological threat. An ideology mattered more than efficiency. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy hit a wall. Growth slowed dramatically. Productivity stagnated. Innovation fell behind the West. Central planners faced an impossible task. Millions of products, billions of inputs. Constant changes in consumer needs. No committee, no matter how large, could calculate it all. Meanwhile, capitalist economies used prices as information, something the Soviet system refused to trust. The result? Warehouses full of unusable goods, chronic shortages of basics, endless lines for bread. And the most dangerous part, the military still worked, which meant the USSR could project power abroad while rotting from within. This masked the crisis until it was too late. In the 1980s, a new leader arrived, Mikhail Gorbachev. He saw the truth clearly. The Soviet Union was dying economically, so he launched two reforms: perestroika economic restructuring, glasnost political openness. For the first time in decades, markets were discussed openly. But here's the fatal mistake. The reforms came too late and too half-hearted. The USSR tried to introduce market elements without private property, without legal frameworks, and without trust. It was capitalism without capitalism. Factories were confused, prices were distorted, shortages worsened, and once people tasted openness, they demanded more. Within years, the Soviet Union collapsed, not defeated by war, not invaded. It collapsed under the weight of its own economic choices. Now comes the real question. What if the Soviet Union had chosen differently? What if, instead of crushing the NEP, it expanded it? Imagine this timeline: state ownership of key industries, private businesses allowed to compete, profit used as a signal, innovation rewarded. Not Western capitalism, but state-guided market socialism, similar to what China later adopted. Because here's the shocking part: China watched the Soviet Union fail, and did the opposite. In the late 1970s, China opened markets, allowed private ownership, and embraced global trade, while keeping political control. The result? Hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty, decades of growth, global economic power. The Soviet Union had the resources, population, education, and technology to do the same earlier. If it had embraced capitalism in the 1930s or 1950s, living standards could have rivaled the West. The Cold War might have softened or never escalated. The USSR might still exist today, but ideology closed the door. This story isn't just about the past. It's happening again. History shows a repeating pattern. Systems that ignore incentives stagnate. Systems that fear change collapse. Systems that adapt survive. Today, governments still debate how much to regulate markets, how much to control industries, how much freedom to allow innovation, and the data is brutal. Countries that embraced markets grew faster. Those that resisted fell behind. The Soviet Union wasn't destroyed by capitalism. It was destroyed by refusing to learn from it. 3 clear takeaways. Takeaway number 1. Economic systems are tools, not religions. When ideology overrides results, collapse follows. Takeaway number 2. Timing matters. Reforms delayed become reforms denied. Takeaway number 3. Power can hide failure, but only temporarily. The Soviet Union believed it was immune to economic reality. It wasn't, and no system is. The real danger isn't choosing the wrong system, it's refusing to change when the evidence is clear. So the question isn't just what if the Soviet Union chose capitalism. The question is, who today is making the same mistake right now? If you found this analysis valuable, like the video. It tells the algorithm this content matters. Subscribe for more deep dive history that challenges what we think we know. And comment below. Do you think the Soviet Union could have survived with a market economy, or was collapse inevitable? Because history doesn't just explain the past, it warns the future.